tonight's meeting, I hope, will be a chance for us to take a step back from the swirling roller coaster of your party activism and thinking about and debates and arguments and debates about the Green Party and your party, debates within your party, and all those questions that I'm sure lots of you have been thinking about, worrying about, concerned about, just to take a step back and have a slightly more not distance, but historical and political perspective on the everyday discussions that we're having. Because it's not just your party and the ins and outs of Zara versus Jeremy and so on. If we look across the Atlantic, in Pacific, if we look across the pond to America, we see Zoran Mamdani, who is going to probably win the mayoral election in New York next week, which will be a really, really significant event. Now, I say that confidently because I do work for Socialist Work and we have to plan articles ahead. And so we're saying, can we confidently predict this? Yes, we can. We had a 15% ahead in the polls, which would be a remarkable victory, I think, for somebody who, although is in the Democratic Party, is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, is very strongly associated with Palestine, has been the subject of huge Islamophobic and racist attacks, and has stood very vocally in favour of the trans community and the LGBTQ plus community, saying only a couple of days ago that he wants to make New York a sanctuary city for LGBTQ plus people, which is, you hear some people in this country, in your party, we can't talk about trans rights and gay rights and refugees because it'll put people off. Well, here is somebody proudly waving the flag for trans rights who could take this incredible election victory. And we've seen before Mamdani, before your party, before Zach Polanski, we saw a number of radical left formations growing out of mass resistance, which was a response to the 2008 financial crash, really. So that took a few years to develop, but if you think around 2012, we had Syriza in Greece, which was born out of mass struggles. 32 general strikes went into the making of Syriza. A couple of years later, you had Podemos in Spain, another left group, which was born out of mass occupations by the indignados in Spain, a radical youth movement which forced a political expression in Podemos. Then, on a slightly quieter note, we had Jeremy Corbyn becoming leader of the Labour Party. The first time round, we had Mélenchon in France, leading France Arise, France Insoumise, breaking his electoral breakthrough the year after Corbyn did, and we had Bernie Sanders making a reasonable job of challenging Hillary Clinton for the candidature for the Democratic Party. Now, why do these matter to people who are in the Socialist Workers' Party? They matter because they can show us that there is an alternative to the nauseating, drip-feeding tsunami of racist claptrap that we are getting day in and day out, all the time. How many times has reform been on Question Time? How many times has reform been on Nigel Farage? Even if the stories the Greens parties are doing well, they still interview somebody from Reform to talk about the collapse of the mainstream parties, an extraordinary tsunami of right-wing propaganda. Electoral victories for radical left formations can give you the confidence that you're not alone, that it's not just you, that not everybody at work is a racist bigot, that not all of your family, hopefully, say things about Nigel Farage when they've had too much to drink and so on. It gives us confidence that large numbers of people, probably most people, given a serious, coherent, principled left-wing alternative, will buy it, will go for it, will join it, and that should give us confidence. But of course, there are two souls to socialism, and that's the title of this talk, and it's taken from a pamphlet by an American socialist called Hal Draper. And I think his phrase about two souls is really interesting, because it's not two strategies, it's not two different ways of organising, it's not do we believe in reform or revolution, it's two souls. It's something much more intrinsic. It's about our approach, our outlook, our imagination, our understanding of the whole world, from which we then derive all sorts of strategy and tactics. But it's saying what is really at the soul of this strategy, what's the heart of what we believe in. And he goes back to the French Revolution of 1789, and he says really for 200 years there has been an incredible variety of socialist groups, of anarchisty socialist groups, of bombs under the cape kind of, we're going to chuck a bomb in and hope the peasants rise against the authority kind of socialist groups, all sorts of different socialist groups, some revolutionary, some reformist, some violent, some peaceful, but they're all divided between those who see socialism coming from above in different ways and those who see socialism coming from below. And those who see socialism coming from above, although they have different conceptions of how this happens, share the view that socialism will be handed down by the educated, by the clever, by the left wing, by the enlightened, by the leaders to the elite, to the people. And sometimes, mostly throughout the 20th century, that's been through Parliament, that elect us and we will make changes on your behalf, and if you're really lucky and we're really radical, we might do some really big changes on your behalf, but we'll be handing it down to you. In contrast to that, socialism from below is based on the idea that the emancipation of the working class can and only must be the act of the working class. That it's only through people taking charge of their own destiny that they can throw off the lack of confidence, the apathy, the bad ideas of the past, and become, as he said, no longer subjects but agents of their own history, people capable of changing their own destiny. And he describes how there have been 2 centuries, really, since the French Revolution, the dawn of capitalism and so on, 2 centuries of yearning. Before that, really, the dawn of class society. I'm sure otherwise Martin will tell me about the Peasants' Revolt, and I don't want to dismiss the years and years that went before that, but just talking about the last 200 years, a yearning of people, and before that, who want change but can't see how they are going to deliver it. So often in feudal societies, it was looking for an outlaw, somebody like Robin Hood, who was going to bring your vengeance on the rich and powerful and perhaps give you a few more coins on the way. Or it was a messiah, or it was a different religious leader. It was somebody who was going to do something to change the miserable conditions you were living in. And this took a more kind of political form after the French Revolution, and Hal Draper writes about Gracchus Babeuf. I've always wanted to talk about Gracchus Babeuf in the branch meeting. And these people are not interesting just because they're interesting historical figures, they are, very important to Marx and Engels' development and so on, but because many of their ideas filter through in different ways to today. So Babeuf was an incredibly heroic revolutionary, and his idea, just coming after the French Revolution, was the conspiracy of equals. That we were the enlightened few, were going to overthrow the old system, and they were going to usher in a dictatorship over the people, because the people weren't quite ready yet. So the enlightened few were going to overthrow the miserable old aristocrats. They were going to bring in a new society and allow space for the people to develop to the point where they were capable of doing it to themselves. So this is 200 years old, but it does sound quite, I mean, you think about, there's quite a few people who say that sort of thing. We have to do it on behalf because they're not quite ready yet. We can't give them freedom yet because they're not educated. We need to make sure that they'll do the right thing with their freedom. So there was Babeuf. There were other groups of socialists, we generally call them utopian socialists, people who, they really hated the system. They were brave and heroic. They thought private property corrupted the soul. They wanted women to be free and free from marriage. They wanted a brotherhood of man. They wanted to see the end of war and so on. But their strategy for doing it was propaganda. We'll show them that they're bad ideas and we've got better ideas, and setting up alternative communities that would inspire others to do the same. A bit like students doing the autonomous encampments, to be honest, but theirs were on a much bigger scale, and they had whole communities doing it. But that idea that we have this prefabricated model and we're going to recruit people to it, when we've got enough people doing it, everybody will see this is much more rational and much nicer, and they will just give up their wealth and power, and we can liberate the whole of humanity. Because, and you hear this argument again today, don't you, we're all human beings. Not all the rich are horrible, which we say, well, they might not be as individuals, but as a class, you know, they're wedded to the system. So you can see one of the themes that runs through these ideas of heroic people like Verboeuf, who wanted to bring in his conspiracy. I mean, he was killed for it. He was hung for his conspiracy against the rich. They didn't hold back. Utopian socialists, what they all share is a lack of democracy, actually. They all thought they had brilliant ideas, they could share them with people. They didn't really want to hear what other people had to say because they might not agree with them. And Draper argues that it was Marx, writing in the 1840s, 1850s, that really the intersection of these marvellous socialist ideas, the end of private property, the end of marriage, the end of religion, all these lovely things, came together with a democratic drive, that this had to be done not from above, through enlightened people, or just good examples. It had to be the democratic will of the majority of the population. So Marx started off as what he called an extreme democrat. We want more civil rights, we want more democracy, we want more rights to vote, to publish newspapers, to assemble, to talk. And then he became more aware of the fact that just rights alone isn't going to change the material basis of society. If you all have the right to vote, your vote is not going to be as much as somebody who owns X. Your vote is not going to be as influential as Elon Musk's. It's not. If you all have the same vote, I don't have X behind me, etc. So Marx's argument was that yes, legal freedoms, we need them extending, we need the right to speak, to vote, to talk, to organise, but we need to change the class conditions, which means some people are living in poverty while others live in wealth. And for Marx, the potential for this was the revolutionary working class. And this is a really important part of our politics, because it's easy to get despondent sometimes when you say, we are the party of the working class, but where are they? Where are the masses with the red flags walking down the street? Sometimes it is easy to think, because there is not much struggle going on now, there never will be, that we need a different strategy, that this is something, a historic break from the past rather than a phase that we're going through. And so Marx's argument was that no matter, in this situation, people might be quite backwards, in this situation, people might be quite apathetic, there are years where people feel that there's not very much they can do, but that doesn't negate the fact that in the long term, it will be that struggle from below, and we have to act like that every day. Even if we don't think it's going to be next week, even if we don't think it's going to be in 10 years' time, that thread of self-emancipation of the working class has to run through our politics. Right, a couple of other things from Hal Draper's book. He talks about how throughout history, the ideas of socialism from above and below have been contested. It is not true that for most of the time, most working class people are apathetic, bored and not interested in politics. Huge debates have broken out between those who have an idea of socialism from above and the revolutionaries who have contested them. So he talks about the Fabian Society. Does anybody know about the Fabian Society? And the Fabians in the late 19th century being contested by the revolutionary politics of the artist William Morris. He also talks about the German Social Democratic Party and the massive fight between Edward Bernstein, who published Evolutionary Socialism in 1898, and Rosa Luxemburg, who just arrived from Zurich, the revolutionary who took him on and argued against his reformist politics. Bernstein argued that class struggle was a thing of the past, that now we could have a peaceful road to socialism, in which socialists should, kind of buddy up with capitalists really and work out how to manage the system in a more beneficial way for everybody. And Rosa Luxemburg said, absolutely not. You are not two different roads. One is peaceful and tranquil through Parliament and trade union activity, and the other, just a bit violent. These do not lead to the same place. They lead in different directions. And she argued importantly that reforms are the means by which revolutionaries fight for revolution. We don't sit back and wait for a revolution to appear or wait for workers to get so miserable they'll suddenly be driven from the lash of necessity into the arms of socialist revolutionaries. We say every time we fight now, every time we win, every militant argument we can win in the workplace is a step towards that future socialist society. So these debates took place inside the big reformist organisations, particularly the German Social Democratic Party, and what it showed was you can win really good policies, you can defeat the right, you can pass lots of lovely resolutions, doesn't mean anything if the party itself is wedded to Parliament. And Rosa Luxemburg did win the argument, and everybody passed policies and said Rosa Luxemburg's absolutely right, we must be revolutionaries, and continued to act in a reformist manner of winning votes, of worrying about trade union funds being seized if you went on strike and all those things. So the question of what organisational form socialism from below can take was a very contested one. And the answer to it really came in 1914 with a catastrophe. And the catastrophe was the outbreak of World War I. A catastrophe of the millions of working class people who died in the war, and a catastrophe for big socialist parties like the German Social Democratic Party, which collapsed into patriotism and into supporting its own ruling class. And the Bolsheviks in Russia, Lenin's Revolutionary Party, was one of the few that said, we will not ally with our own ruling classes. There's always an excuse. The Germans are barbarous. You know, the Russians are barbaric. We've got to protect our own part. There's always an excuse to side with your ruling class in an imperialist war. And it was the Bolsheviks who said, we will not do it. So this really cast a light on what kind of election machines, what kind of left-wing party we need. The big left-wing parties like the German party had a powerful left wing. Goodness me, it had Rosa Luxemburg in it, had some heroes of the socialist movement in that party. But when push came to shove, it was the moderate reformist wing that won out, and that has an impact in two ways. One, the day-to-day struggles are limited, because if you have forgotten the idea of a revolution, then you are moderate. You are worried about losing support from the people you need. You're worried about your union funds. You're worried about illegality. And you clamp down on the struggle now. And in the revolution itself, which broke out in Germany, they used their credentials to derail the revolution. They used the idea that they were the left-wing party, that they were the party who spoke about workers' struggles. They used that to derail the glimpse of real workers' power. And so the conclusions the international socialist movement drew were that revolutionaries have to be independent. They cannot be within big left-wing groups. They have to fight independently. And that in order to not be isolated and only talking to yourself in a room, you have to organise to fight with other people over specific demands like the United Front. So we fight with others over Palestine, over racism, over women against the far right, and so on. The problem I think we have today, to come on very quickly, is that left-wing parties are not just united fronts, are they? So it's not just a question of saying, I don't care, we'll link arms to fight racism, and then we'll talk about climate change, or then we'll talk about other questions afterwards. A political party like your party poses problems as well as opportunities. I mean, the opportunity is, who doesn't want to see a fantastic left-wing party in Britain? We know at least 800,000 people do. That's fantastic. We'd all love to wipe the smirk off Nigel Farage's face. We want to pull all those people together. We want them to, mobilise to stand up against racism, mobilise for Palestine, and so on. But there's an issue, which is that our experience of these organisations is that if you cannot organise as a revolutionary within them, then you become the left-wing voice of that movement. And unfortunately, the experience is that those who have tried to use parliamentary means have not been 100% successful, as in at all. Now, yeah, I'm always a bit humble about this, because if you say, well, Syriza failed, and Podemos failed, and Mélenchon probably will fail, and people can say, well, the revolutionary history is not exactly glittering with successful examples, so I don't think we can kind of go, nah. It's a question of saying, where does power in society lie? Can you use the state in a radical way to redistribute wealth to the poor? Do you think they're going to let you do that? Where does the power and the pressure come from? And all too often, people have shaped their political views to suit the left formation instead of taking their political arguments to contest within left formation. So in Syriza, people like Kostas Lapativas, who's a very good socialist, started saying about the state, well, the state is a problem because it's police and it's the armies and so on. We can work within it, above it, below it and around it. And you think, if you really challenge the state on the streets, you cannot do the above, you only do the below. If you don't smash them, they'll smash you. And Podemos, again a party built on mass resistance, started talking about people power, moving away from the centrality of the working class to any agent of change. And this is something I think we have to avoid. I would argue, and I might be controversial here, so please don't hold back, but I think that your party is a very weak shadow actually of what Syriza was and what Podemos was, because it's not really built out of struggle. It's built out of Palestine, it's built out of hatred of racism, and those are brilliant things. But if you talk about where the power is going to come from, you know, they're gaining power because the centre is collapsing, rather than because there is a insurgent working class movement on the streets. And I do think you have to say that the arguments at the top of your party have been disgraceful, and that some of the comments made by some of the MPs are also disgraceful. Adnan Hussein this week saying, you know, we don't want fascists, we don't want anti-fascists either. I mean, as well as... sorry, you haven't heard the tweet, sorry. Yes, he tweeted that we don't want silly people. We Brits don't want silly people doing this kind of thing. Now, I understand in an electoral formation, you're going to have people with lots of views. That's the point of it, isn't it? But the problem is, in this electoral formation, the MPs call the shots. And the man who made that comment is actually the nominating officer. So he's the guy who will have a lot of influence. I know they're going to set up other things about who can be or can't be a candidate. And therefore, I think we have a problem with your party. Now, I think it is still worth getting in there, still worth fighting to find the best people inside it and putting forward our amendments for democracy, for standing on a principled basis for things. And I still think your party is a better option than the Greens, because although Zach Polansky, I was thinking of Poland 80 years in 1981, Zach Polansky, a brilliant, you know, he's very left-wing, he's actually much more left-wing than most of the MPs, probably apart from Zara Sultana. But it's not about just left-wing speeches, it's about what class your party represents, and it's about the experience of them in office. So I think we need to raise our red flag, our banner, our principled banners, and I've heard people at your party meetings saying, we're for trans rights, huge clap, we're for refugees, huge clap, we're for building resistance from the bottom up, huge clap. And we need to do that and find the people that are clapping and bring them towards our politics, because reformism will constantly reorganise itself. It's not going to be defeated. People don't look at Keir Starmer and go, you know what, Parliament sucks, I'm going to be a revolutionary. They don't. They find the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And it comes from people's hatred of the system, combined with their lack of confidence that they themselves can change it. So we have to come in on the side of that confidence and say we will stand with you against the right in your party and against the right in elections, but we want the streets, we want the workplaces, and we want mass resistance, and we want socialist politics.